most of the solid body electric guitars that I've encountered have a flat bottom nut like this one. You'll notice this nut is slotted for the, well, we dropped it. Hello everyone and welcome to the Guitar Foster Parent. I'm John McLain, delighted to have you with us for this edition of the show. This is the show where we take in unwanted instruments, fix them up, make them sound and look good and feel good, and we turn them out to a forever home. We donate them to where they will be played and cared for just like they were made to do. Glad you're with us today. I want to tell you that today we're going to continue on our Harmony 2814 project that we began just last time here on the channel. So if you're just joining us for the first time, welcome in. You haven't missed much. You can go back and catch up pretty quickly as we're working on this nice Harmony guitar. I want to encourage you, if you're new to the channel and you like what you see today, to subscribe to us and go ahead and like this video. That helps us out with YouTube, and of course if you'll click the notification bell, that will help you stay up to what we're doing here on these various projects. Don't know how long this Harmony project will take. We're kind of working as we go, and you'll find on this channel that we learn together as we go. I'm not an expert on very much of any of this. I'm learning as I go, and it's a lot of fun to kind of restore and rebuild these instruments. To kind of recap last week briefly, we did a front to back inspection. We started down at the bottom of the guitar, worked all the way up to the tip of the headstock. We removed the pick guard and we looked inside. And to refresh, I was very impressed. This guitar looks like it's in really, really great shape. Couple of items of note that we did find that we'll be addressing. This strap hook here is loose and this screw is stripped. So we'll be fixing that eventually. I had a great suggestion that we should go ahead and replace this input jack, and I did find some issues with that. So we're going to put a pure tone multi-point contact input jack in here eventually. Pickups and pots and knobs we're going to keep. They sound fine and I don't think they need to be changed. Up on the fretboard we did find a little bit of indentation on some of these frets. We're going to polish these really good, get them cleaned up and see how they feel. And of course, every guitar needs a good thorough fretboard cleaning, and we'll put some nice oil on this to help this wood last a little bit longer. Moving on up, we did find damage to the nut, and if you can't see it here, here's a close-up shot of what we found. A little chunk of material missing from the nut. And so we're going to be replacing the nut today. And then finally we talked about the tuning heads. I did find that these tuning heads are probably in need of replacement. Some of them are loose. We'll do that another time. But that's kind of a recap on what we found on our initial inspection. But today it's all about getting nutty. That's right. We're going to put a new nut on this guitar. This is a bone nut, and you can see if you look up close, it has some slots carved in it for the strings. There's a very, very good chance that these slots are not deep enough to hold the strings. This is normal. I have a set of files, and we'll actually have to file these slots deeper and maybe wider depending on how this thing is slotted, but it's just really notched. These are not going to be deep enough, and I can almost guarantee you we'll need to be doing some filing. And if you own a guitar like this, you'll recognize just by looking at this nut that these slots are not quite deep enough, but it's designed to be adjusted for the individual application. We'll set this nut aside. Let's talk a little bit about how to remove a nut from a guitar. It's not rocket science, as you might imagine. These guitars typically will have the nut just affixed with a dot or two of wood glue. Nothing like super glue or epoxy or anything like that. If you think about it, the only reason to even glue the nut in at all is when the strings are off and there's no tension. So if you take your strings off of your guitar and you're going to clean it or put on a new set, you don't want the nut falling out and getting lost or broken or anything like that. That's really the only reason to glue it in. When the strings are on and under tension, obviously the nut is not going to go anywhere. So hopefully these is going to be easy to remove. And it's very technical, so pay close attention. It's a very technical process on how to remove a guitar nut. You ready? Here we go. We're going to take this is called pliers, and the idea is to break that glue loose without breaking the nut. Here's why. If the old nut breaks, you say, well, what's the difference? We're going to throw it away anyway. That's true. But if it breaks, you're going to have material stuck in the slot, and now you're going to be faced with having to clean that material out of the slot without damaging the slot itself, and it's just extra work. Ideally, you'll take these pliers, and I'll use the new nut as an example. You'll take these pliers and just imagine that this is the nut we're going to remove, and then you'll take them, and then you'll just grab a hold of them like this, and then you'll just wiggle back and forth slightly, just ever so slightly, to try to break that little dot of glue loose on the nut, and hopefully you can just lift it out. So, without further ado, let's work on removing the nut from this guitar. Alright, so all you do, once again, is take your pliers, and then I'm going to very gently grab right about the center of the nut. Again, you want to be careful not to, this is a delicate operation. In all seriousness, you don't want to mar up the fretboard surface here. And in fact, you may, I don't recommend needle nose pliers for that reason, because needle nose pliers, you're going to have more of a tendency to gouge this out. Get a flat pair, and in fact, if you have one that's even wider than these jaws here, it might be even better. But I find a typical household set will work just fine. Just grab the nut down low and give it a little bit of a wiggle back and forth like this. And the idea is to try to break that glue loose. Let's give it a try. Well, unfortunately, this nut was glued in very, very tightly. As you can see, the pliers have broken some of the pieces out. This does look like it is a bone nut, by the way, but you can really tell by the material. The plastic ones feel this is definitely a bone nut. So, plan B is always to very gently remove this nut as much as you can. The idea is to protect this wood surface. You don't want to damage either side of this. And in fact, if you want to, you can put down some masking tape along here just to give it a little layer of protection. I'll probably do that now because I'm going to have to get a little more aggressive to get this nut out. So we'll put down a little bit of tape here to protect this, and then we'll get going and try to get this nut out. It's probably going to be more of a chore than I'd hoped, but that's how it goes sometimes. Alright, so great news. We were able to pull the nut out with just a little bit more force upward. Here are a set of files that I have here that are just designed for various purposes. They're not terribly expensive. They're just cheap little files. Some of them are triangular, some of them are flat and thin, some of them are rounded and beveled, different types of shapes. We're going to find one and just very gently try to remove some of this glue and prepare this slot. And again, I don't want to deepen the slot, I don't want to change its depth, and certainly not its width, but I'd just like to clean this area up a little bit while we're here. Okay, all finished. It looks like the slot is prepared. I'm going to go ahead and remove this masking tape now. And we'll get rid of that. And here you go. Here's our nut slot. Give it a good, all the dust out of there. Looks good. I think it's going to be just fine. Now, the next step, here's our new nut, and I want to show you that the wider string, of course, was slotted out a little wider. You want to make sure that that's going to be where string number 6 is going to sit. So this will actually go to the top of the guitar, like this. So the first thing we do when we're installing a new nut is we want to just dry fit it. There's going to be slight differences in these slots. So I want to see how this fits in here, if it fits in here. And again, you want to be careful. This is a very thin piece of bone. You can't roughhouse with this thing. It's somewhat brittle. As you saw removing the old one, if you put too much force on it, it will splinter and break. But I just want to dry fit this into this slot and see if I'm going to have to do any work. And it looks like that I probably will have to do a little bit of work to get it to fit in there. Again, if it's snug, that's good, but you don't want to have to force the nut in. And I don't know if you can see, my finger's probably in the way, but this nut does not want to fit in this slot as it is. So, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to take some very fine grit sandpaper, and I'm going to remove just a little layer of material from the nut. Okay, I'm not going to do any carving on the guitar, and here's why. If I start sanding on the guitar, this is a very grainy wood. I have a chance to splinter this if I'm going through here. This bone right here will sand up really nice, and so I've always seen it done, and I've always been told it's always better to remove material off of the nut instead of the guitar slot. And so what I'm going to do is take a little sandpaper right now, and I'm just going to remove just very thin layers, because remember, you can always take some more off, but you can't add it back on what you sanded. So that's kind of one of those rules of do-it-yourselfers, right? You can always cut some more off of the board, but if you cut it too short, Bob's your uncle. So anyway, we're going to go ahead, and I'm just kind of looking and see, it looks like down here it's pretty good, but up toward the top or maybe the center. So I'm just going to start sanding a little bit on this nut, and we'll take a little material off and we'll refit it. You can see I'm choosing a pretty fine grit sandpaper. I'm just going to lay the sandpaper flat on the bench, and I'm going to remove a little bit of material from this nut. Okay, let's give it a try, see how it fits now. Yeah, not quite. Let's go some more. This may sound strange, but I'm going to say it anyway. As I was sanding this, there was an odor of bone. It's kind of interesting. When the heat from the sandpaper friction, this actually smells like an old dry bone, like maybe a dog bone or something, which I always find to be interesting. Another note on sanding this, you might have noticed I tried to put fairly equal pressure. You don't just want to press on the outsides, otherwise you're going to narrow the ends of the nut but not the middle. That may go without saying, but again, very fine grit, take your time. You don't want to get too aggressive with this. And eventually you'll get the nut to slip right in. See, it's still just a little wide in the middle. The ends are fitting in. So I'm going to sand a little bit more off the center. Okay. Let's try and see how it goes now. All right, good news. We're now slotted. You know, it's funny that such a small piece of delicate bone like this is such an important part of the guitar. It provides the upper tension on this end as opposed to the bridge. And so having a good solid nut that's well fitted is very important for a guitar staying in tune. And of course, the slots in the nut, also important that the strings vibrate cleanly. You don't have any buzz or anything like that. Often a guitar that has buzzy strings usually means the nut slot is either too wide or too deep, or it's not cut properly. Well, now that our nut is dry fitted, what I'm going to do is apply some glue. This is a very, very technical process. You take a modern everyday toothpick and the wood glue of your choice, some carpenter's glue. You don't need much, and in fact what I'd recommend is don't even mess with this. Just take the lid off and use what's in the lid. That's going to be plenty of glue to do what we need to do. So I just take my toothpick, dunk just a little bit, just get a little bit of glue on the end, and just barely apply a couple of little dots. Remember, all we need is enough glue to hold this nut from falling out from gravity if we remove the strings later on. When the strings are on, obviously, the tension of the strings is going to keep the nut in place. This is just for when the strings are off. So you just need a dot or two. And now we're going to fit our nut. And remember, make sure that the wide slot for string number 6, the lower E string, if you will, is at the oriented correctly on the neck. This guitar actually is toward here, so this is how the nut should be oriented. So what we're going to do very gently is take the nut and just work it down into the slot a little bit at a time. And then when we get it fitted, then all right, so we're in the slot. We're going to check these gaps. As you can see, that gap looks really good. We're going to turn the guitar over and show you the other one. So the nut is in its slot. How about that? Looks good. Well, now that our nut is set and glued in, the next step is going to be to adjust these slots in the neck right here, or in the nut rather. And of course there's 6 for each of the 6 strings. As I said earlier, when they make these slots are just basically, they're just lines. They're not really completed because every guitar will need to be slotted a little differently. Now, one thing I'll caution you about, and here's the old nut, and unfortunately we had to break it quite a bit to get it out. It's not necessarily the best idea to copy. I've seen some people line up the old nut and the new nut before they install, and then they'll just file the slots even. Well, who's to say that this one wasn't worn out and the slots were too deep? We really don't know that. The way to file these is a lot of measurement, okay? Obviously, the depth of these slots will affect how deep the strings sit in the nut, which is going to affect the action or the distance between the strings and the frets. Obviously, most players don't like action that's too high, where the strings are sitting high off the fretboard, and they of course don't want them too low because then the strings are going to make contact with the frets and cause noise. So we want to have that happy medium here, and that takes, you guessed it, trial and error. The one thing though about adjusting the action at the nut, this is permanent. You cannot put more material in once you've filed it out. We're going to be filing these using an instrument very much like this one. I just grabbed this one. I don't know if it's the correct one. But basically, we'll be filing these slots out with special files to get them deeper. The other thing we're going to address next time are these tuners. I've noticed, and I told you we would do this, when I took these tuners off, there's a lot of, look at this one here. It's like a loose tooth. If you've ever had a guitar that won't stay in tune, this is one of the big problems. Worn out or cheap tuners. And no offense to the good folks that made this instrument, it was made to be affordable. These tuners are very cheap. They're plastic. This one, some of them, like this one, the A string one feels pretty tight. This one right here is terrible, and this one down here is also terrible. So new tuners for the Harmony. We're going to do that because I want these to be nice tuners, because one thing that will have a guitar relegated to the closet faster than anything is if it won't stay in tune. Nobody likes a guitar that won't stay in tune. Okay, so what have we done today? We removed this old nut and broke it in the process. It was glued in pretty tight, but we finally broke it loose, and with a little upward pressure we're able to remove it, and we've installed a brand new, I'll turn it right side up for you, a brand new bone nut. We'll let the glue dry. The good thing is, and this is what is most desirable, you know, we talked about not wanting to force the nut into the slot. That's always ideal, mainly because you don't want to break the nut. The other nice thing is that it's not sliding around. Could we have not glued this particular nut? Probably, and I'll tell you, on the OG Precision base, that was the case. If you've seen those videos, then one of those, I talk about how the nut that I replaced on that guitar was so snug and perfect, I didn't have to put any glue on. Probably didn't have to glue this one either. I don't think it's going anywhere. However, I wanted to show the right way to glue it in, and a little extra insurance never hurts. So we'll address, like I said, tuners next time. I'm going to get some nice new Grover tuners for this guitar. That's a really good brand that are known for their reliability, because again, nothing will make a guitar unfun to play than if it won't stay in tune and you're constantly having to tune it. Loose tuners are often a problem with that. And then we'll go ahead and slot this nut out. That's going to be a trial and error process that will require putting strings on the guitar. So that will probably be on a later episode, but we'll tackle the tuners next time on the Guitar Foster Parent. Thanks for watching. I want to encourage you to subscribe to the channel. Leave me some comments if you have anything you'd like to add or any suggestions you'd like to make. And of course, if you know a loving forever home that would love to own this harmony when we're all done with it, let me know that down in the comments as well, and we'll get a list of nominees together. And then we'll give this guitar to a forever home where it will be loved and played when we're all done with it. That's all the time we have for now. I want to thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time on the Guitar Foster Parent.